Yes, 53 years, because I remember in 2018 we cut a cake celebrating 50 years of Barry's academic life. And during those 53 years, Barry has guided 82, or counting, still counting, 82 PhD students, which is phenomenal. And Barry does it in such a way, most students get in and think, oh my God, we have to publish in star journals, top journals, that's all I'm going to survive. Barry says, that's rubbish. You don't need to publish. First, worry about doing your PhD. Complete the PhD first, and then start thinking of publishing. And these words of wisdom have inspired so many people, and 3 of them are over here, Ashraf, Kim, and Tiffany. They've, in the past 3 years, they've all been guided by Barry, and they've completed their PhD. Today, Barry is going to talk about the PhD journey. But before I invite Barry, there's one interesting snippet which I need to share. Barry is currently engaged with the Kepler Space Institute, focused on space education philosophy, preparing for life on Mars. And it's serious. It's really, that's what he's doing. So for those of you, call in if you're interested going to Mars, you can contact Barry. Via Phil Hoffman. Yes, that's a good one. Yes, we have another member. Please welcome our guest speaker for today, Dr. Barry Elsey. Or you can use it here, whichever is convenient. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'm talking about the highest academic award, the highest academic degree worldwide. It's an international benchmark standard. If you've got a PhD, you can go anywhere in the world. It's recognized internationally. So it's a very significant award, and that's what I'm talking about. Just recently, I completed my last kind of run, supervising PhDs. I'm not quite hanging up my boots just yet, because as Dean of Space Education for the Kepler Space University in the US, my job is to help design a PhD in space philosophy. And this brings me in touch with people from NASA and USAF, who all, for one reason or another, are passionate about space and want to theorize about life on Mars and various other places. I haven't been, but I know something about the process of getting a PhD. And in fact, that's the focus of my talk today. There are many things I could talk about, but the one that I'm most interested, most passionate about is the PhD as a learning journey. So my attention is on focus. The subtext of my talk would be to ask the question, what relevance would a PhD have for people in the business and management community? I think I can answer that because in the last 20 years or so, I've been dealing mostly with people from the business and management community, particularly offshore, particularly in Southeast Asia. There's a huge demand for what we do in academia from people in business, and it's interesting to see a kind of synergy emerging, and I'll talk a bit about that. Just as an example, this is a fairly standard PhD. It weighs 2 kilos. It comprises 120,000 words. It was written by a former retired naval commander in the Israeli Navy. And he and I got together when I worked at the University of South Australia. And we sat on Clarke Quay in Singapore, and he said, my job now, after 25 years in the Navy and rising to the rank of naval commander, is to intellectualize my knowledge as an arms dealer. So this man was selling missile defense technology, drone technology, you name it, and this is about the marketing process. So this man, in my view, intellectualized all that he knew over 25 years or so of practice, being a marketing manager for Elbit Systems, an Israeli company. He was based in Singapore, they are based in Tel Aviv, and I got to know that his world like no other. So he made a unique contribution to knowledge, which I hope is relevant to business practice in that particular industry. So that's a real product that I'm going to be talking about. I've invited 3 of my recent PhDs here to not only give me support, but answer any questions that might come up. Before I get into the process that I want to talk about, show of hands, who has a PhD or knows someone in the family with one? One. Oh, my goodness me. Oh, you know too much. You know too much. That's good. That's good to know. Let's hope then that what I have to say is real and relevant to you. I'm looking at the first slide, which in fact is at the end of the long process. Julie Bishop is getting an honorary doctorate for her services to politics. And at the front, carrying the mace, was my student from Kazakhstan, who has a background in aerospace engineering and is in fact a rocket scientist with speciality in rocket launch technology. So she was getting a PhD, and she got the honor of carrying the mace because she got a scholarship medal for her PhD, which meant there were no criticisms at all. It was a complete pass with no amendments required, which is standard procedure. So she was remarkably lucky, but deserved it. And on the right-hand side, there's Amina with me and Noel Lindsay. I think you've had him here as a speaker in the past. And on his left is Barbara, who's Lithuanian, Israeli, who spoke, when I knew her last, 6 different languages. So pretty impressive bunch of people, and they are completing their journey. But at the bottom, the PhD learning journey, I can't do Latin, really. If anyone knows it, you can see my mistakes. The Latin meaning of a PhD is to give yourself to philosophy, which means the love of learning for its own sake. That the love of learning, the love of knowledge, that's what that's about. My own experience, just as a matter of interest, as Rajiv has said, I've been doing it a long time, so I kind of know it like the back of my hand. And I think that I've worked with 4 different groups of people. I wouldn't say at the top, but probably the most challenging in terms of intellectual activity would be the people who have serious background in business and management at a very senior level. So one of my students was Director General of Internal Trade in the Thai government, and his job now, with his PhD, is head of the Economic Development Board. So I hope that somehow doing a PhD with me helped him gain certain competencies and levels of knowledge that enable him to move from what looked to me a pretty senior position to an even more so one. And there'd be several others. I have to look. CEOs of major companies, in pharmaceutical in particular, in defense technology, managing directors of large enterprises, senior managers in international companies, and a number of successful entrepreneurs. So in my time, those are the people that I have been working with, and they all testify one way or another that the PhD was a significant learning journey for them, and they gained much from it. Another group would be university academics. You don't have an academic career now unless you've got a PhD, and it's becoming increasingly harder because the expectation is that you would have already published a number of times before you get a PhD. That our old idea of a long apprenticeship seems to be condensed now into a few short years. But that's another group of people that I've had a lot of dealings with. And the third group, probably the ones that I've had most experience of in recent times, would be those on scholarships of one sort or another sent by their country, their governments, to get a PhD as the foundation of a career, usually an academic career, but not entirely. So I've had students from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, from Vietnam, and many other places. So they're a sort of foundational group. And the fourth group would be those who are there out of curiosity. They are driven by some lived experience of their own. They don't need it for career purpose, but they are there because it means something significant to them, and that's a different kind of experience. So in my time, I would have worked with closely 4 different groups of people. With me today are 4 who, one way or another, all have pretty illustrious backgrounds before they get their PhD, and hopefully the PhD continues the long journey that they began. That's Ashraf here from Libya, Tiffany, who's a local girl, but Portuguese and Lebanese background, Kim, a local lad, also from Malaysia, but that's typical, and Amina back in Sydney, she is now no longer a rocket scientist, but she's head of complex projects for Oricon and seems to be in charge, as far as I can make out, of the Sydney Tunnel project. So these are people who make pretty significant contributions one way or another. Now, I'll see if I can get this right. What does a PhD mean to those that do one? What I'm briefly saying is people have more usually than one motivation. It's the peak of educational experience. They've been in the system a long time, and those that keep going just round it off nicely with a PhD. There's those who get academic scholarships. This is the foundation for a career in academe. There's those who are driven by publication, because without publication nowadays it's very hard to sustain a career in academic life. There's those who are building their careers. There's those who are based on using their lived experience. So many motivations drive people's curiosity to do a PhD. I'm comfortable with all and every one of them. It's important for them to know why you're doing it, because then you can help sustain the motivation to do so. This is I won't read it out, but a Chinese student of mine found this poem written hundreds of years ago, and essentially it seems to typify what the nature of the PhD journey is like. And I'll just read some of it, that when you're about to be rewarded with a symbol of high social status, you go through trials and tribulations. Now, everyone who's done a PhD would tell me that it's a hard learning journey. It's up and down with your emotions. You sometimes feel you're not going to make it, and then the clouds clear and you do, and so on and so forth. This is a continuous process for the 3 or more years that you do a PhD. It's rare to do it in less than 3 years. Madeleine Albright, who rose to be Secretary of State in the Clinton government, took 13 years to do hers. It doesn't matter how long it takes, it's getting there in the end, but the journey is a hard one. There's no doubt about that. And one of my students discovered a Chinese poem which said that hundreds of years ago. It's not just, of course, the PhD, it can be life. But here's an example where you do something which has meaning, but it's not an easy gift. It's a hard journey. For me, as a sociologist, it's a significant status passage. If you look at it as a journey over several years, I can guarantee that it's a very prescribed and scheduled journey, become much more so than it used to be. In my day, you either did it or you didn't, and you took your time as much as you liked, and you were very much on your own while you were doing it. Today, that is no longer the case. It's a very prescribed and controlled process, a bit like any other form of manufacturing, and lots of people have a say in your PhD journey. The most important one, of course, would have to be your supervisor or advisor, but lots of other people have a say in what goes on, and so the journey is a very prescribed and controlled one. But in return for all that, you get an award, you get a standing in society with increased social capital. You change your social position in a pretty significant way. That's one way of looking at it. So as while you are learning and the hard yards of learning, you are also gaining social capital and social status. What is at the heart of a PhD? One of the first things that I found dealing with the business fraternity is to say to them, this is not a big project. Size does not matter. It's quality and depth that matters. So we engage in a pretty tough process, I can assure you. The name of the game is to extend the boundaries of knowledge. It's a pretty generous 19th century idea, but for me, it means much more than that. And I've got them to, their job is to produce new knowledge. And it has to stand up to very critical and forensic examination by experts in the field that you are working in. And I can guarantee it's a pretty tough process. No stones are left unturned, and you put your life on the line when you're doing this. If you fail, you never quite recover. So you have to succeed, and you have to break new ground with new knowledge. So that's the name of the game, and that means three things. You have to produce new information. We have to be able to say with hand on heart and to the satisfaction of external examiners who can come from anywhere in the world that, yes, this is new information. I didn't know that before. Then you've got to be able to add to that new knowledge insights that are novel, are new, are different, are interesting ways of interpreting that information, that data. Third, and most challenging of all, you are expected to produce new theoretical interpretation. And that is the toughest leap of all. It's one thing to produce new information, another to add some interesting insights, but can you add to theoretical explanation, either adding something new or supporting an existing theory? That's a very tough call, and if you don't get it right, you have to resubmit and redo it. And that is the last thing anyone wants after 3 or more years. So we've got to get as close as we can to satisfying that need to break new ground in a theoretical way, not just an empirical way. So that's the name of the game at the heart of it. Now, Amina, when she did her PhD, which, by the way, was on the Australian Army as a complex adaptive system, and she brought to the study of the military a whole sort of set of theoretical ideas about complex systems. And she was basically asking, is the Australian Army fit for purpose under new conditions of military engagement. And it took 2 years of fairly patient negotiation with the ADF before they agreed to allow a civilian to interview the generals. And together we interviewed 19 senior military officers, head of army, former head of army, various other people. We went around and met them, and talked to them and interviewed them according to a script, and we got their insights. And that was most unusual because they don't normally talk to civilians. But we got them, and they did agree to do so. It took 2 years, one of the reasons why she had a Russian passport. And until the day that she became an Australian citizen, it was, well, maybe not. And as soon as she got her citizenship, the light went green. And they said, okay, ready to go. They accepted me because I'm a Brit, and you're on my side. Okay, now, Mina made a very valid point. It's commonplace to regard it as a lonely journey that you go on your own. I've already said that's not in fact the case because lots of people manage this process. But her way of looking at it was a very interesting way and a very positive way in which she engaged, as she saw it, with lots of other people who regarded the process as something that they all had a share in producing a good outcome. And I must say, when we talked to head of armies, the 3 or 4 of them, they were fantastic. They bent over backwards to accommodate and facilitate her learning journey. While she was pregnant, they were perfect gentlemen. It was a wonderful experience. And I liked the way that she saw it as not just a lonely journey, but a very important shared one. Now follow that up, because that's very much my line. You're not alone. You have to work closely with me. We need to know each other pretty well. We need to be comfortable with each other, and we must share this journey as much as possible. So just looking at 4 of those pictures there, the one in the top left-hand corner is when I went to Aceh, which is the furthest province in Indonesia, and I was sent by the University of Adelaide to explore the possibilities of setting up a PhD program for academic staff in the 5 universities in this huge province of Aceh. And the demand is enormous. And so I walked into a couple of universities and there would be 30 or 40 people ready, willing and able to do PhDs, just needing an opportunity to do so. And the Indonesian government got behind it, but COVID came along and put paid to that. It has been put on the back burner. But it was a demonstration that there was a huge pent-up demand, and I would have made sure that as far as possible, this journey was shared as much as possible. If they came here, they need to work together to know each other and collaborate with each other closely. In the bottom corner is a young Russian Kazakh who continued her career. She's now at UniSA as an associate professor, so she's done very well. Her subject was on complex systems, the mining industry in the Flinders Ranges. Not the Flinders Ranges, I don't mean that. The Iron Triangle. So these are good examples of, as much as possible, it has to be a shared learning journey. My theme is hold conversations little and often. Never let it go cool. Don't ever let it go cold. What have I lost here? Be normal. For me, there's no point just treating it as a strictly academic process. Laugh, cry, eat, drink, play. I used the children of my PhD students to act as my stand-ins for this. But the message is clear that as far as possible, try to make this a normal experience. You notice me playing golf. I had one student who was vice president in Caterpillar Tractors, based in Singapore, who insisted that we never met in a building, that we only met on a golf course. So, fine, I was up for it, and he had a spare set of clubs, and that's how we spent our time supervising his PhD. That's a good way to go. Family and friends are involved too. It's very important. There's a nice picture of Rajiv, and in the group of his time, getting together at Christmas time, sharing each other's company and patting each other on the back and encouraging people in this process. So family and friends are involved. What does it mean to be a PhD advisor? Well, it's very privileged work. You have to be incredibly flexible and stretch your mind around topics. I am not a subject supervisor, I'm a process supervisor. I don't know the knowledge, but I do know the process, and I learn what I can from the students. It's all about relationships. For me, if there isn't heart in it, then something is critically missing from that process. But for me, it's also an incredible return on investment. If I say I'm anything more than 5% of the effort, something is not quite right about that, and that the student hasn't got ownership of this product. So for me, for 5% of my effort, we get 100% return, so it's pretty good. A Chinese student, how many minutes have I got? 1 minute. A Chinese student once said to me, "You are our guide, our philosopher, and our friend." And I think of the things that I value the most about this process is the friendship and fellowship that you experience on this process. I'll just do one more. Doing a PhD, and this is my final remark really, is more than producing new knowledge. So at one level, in the old Latin, the job is to train and to shape and to mould. And of course, we do that. That becomes part and parcel of the process. But it is something more than that. It is to empower people to facilitate their future careers. And that is something hard to define exactly what that is, but you are part of a very important process which is about enabling that person to be the best of what they are. And that, for me, makes that journey highly significant. Happy endings. These are some of my students. All's well that ends well. I'll just go through them. Ron Grill at the bottom right-hand corner is an old resident at 82, still going strong. He did his PhD in his 70s. The man above him did a study on the tour down under and the business side of the tour down under. Did it produce the benefits it claimed to produce, etc., etc. The main thing is everyone should feel happy at the end and get an award that they can carry with them for the rest of their life, but hopefully with fond, happy memories of that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. We have time for about 2 questions. Yep. And I'm sure Florin will ask one because Florin is from the School of Economics.
I've gone through the whole thing, so it's a little bit kind of like different.
Hello? I just wanted to know, is it too late for me to enroll in a PhD on the efficacy of Rotary worldwide?
Well, if you've got 3 years of your life that you're happy to spend on hard graft, yes, submit a good idea.
It depends if you have money. So
Lisa wants.
Yep. I'll answer what I just said, and well, I'll get to Lisa. No, so because I'm also a supervisor as an academic, and one of the things, I'm a program director for master programs, and I have students asking about can there be PhD students, and one of the entry requirements, the difference is between you want to do a PhD, or do you want to do a PhD and getting paid to do a PhD? And that's a kind of a little bit of a difference of which one category you fall into and what kind of expectation and trajectory and reaction you will get from potential supervisors, depending on whether you essentially want just do it for curiosity and kind of like your own personal gain, or whether you want to do it as kind of like almost like a job on kind of like the academic trajectory.
Thanks, Florian. No, it wasn't my question. Thank you so much. My question is around the value business applies to PhDs. I work with a lot of people who've got PhDs, and I can't see that past the first few years and past them actually starting their job roles, that it's actually provided any benefit to them in the long term within my industry.
There are a few who would say that it was a long journey that didn't produce much outcome for them. But for every one of those, I can think of 10 that say that it's a lasting benefit. I'll give you a concrete example. I had a young Italian here doing her PhD. She couldn't find meaningful work in Adelaide. Now is in Brussels, in the EU, looking at chemical hazards, as in the Lebanon situation. She's got a very significant job. And she said to me, everything she learned in her PhD, she is applying on a daily basis in her workplace. So, and she's gone on, she writes, she's going to produce a book, so she hasn't stopped. It's just the beginning of a long process, but of course she has to remain applied to keep on going. Yeah. So,
one last question from Frank.
Frank.
Thanks, Barry. My question is the expectation for publication and continued publication. Of course, knowledge is wealth, and most companies now do not want to have the knowledge published. And I have a patent attorney here sitting beside me today who will actually be ensuring that it can't be stolen by others. So is this a realistic expectation from young research graduates?
No, it's totally unrealistic, and I don't think it's very fair. I think of it as a learning apprenticeship. You take 3 years to learn your craft as a researcher in a subject field. For me, to get the PhD is enough, and then you go on to publish from it, or you have the confidence and the competence to continue as a researcher getting funding from various bodies. But I do not agree with the idea that you must make publication somehow conditional on the PhD process. I think it's unfair, it's unreasonable, and maybe not very wise. So I'm against it. And I've said that many times. That doesn't make me popular because it's moved in that direction. But you can see where I come. I'm old school. I got my PhD in the 70s, and it was enough to get the PhD. You got your confidence, you'd learned your craft, and then you could continue as a journeyman to practice it forever. That was my position.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. And as a symbol of our appreciation, we would like to give you a certificate. A donation will be made on your behalf by the Rotary Club of Adelaide to local community and youth projects.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Well,
Please thank Dr. Barry.